I was warned about that farm on my first week as a deputy in rural Indiana. It sat at the end of a dirt road just outside of town, overgrown and leaning like it was trying to fall away from the world. Locals never said much, just vague mentions of things that didn't feel right there. My supervisor once told me, if the sun's down, you stay out of that property. At first, I thought it was just small-town superstition. Every place has its stories, and this town had more than a few. But the way people looked when the farm was brought up, like something heavy passed through them, it made me hesitate. Even the seasoned officers avoided it after dark like it was unspoken law. For the first year, I followed that rule without question. I patrolled near the outskirts, but never turned up the lane past dusk. During the day, it looked abandoned, peeling paint, broken windows, a windmill that creaked even without wind. But at night, even from the road, I'd get this crawling feeling across my back, like something inside knew I was watching. One night in late October, I was working the late shift alone. Our usual night rotation was down a car because of an injury, so coverage was thin. Dispatch got a call about strange lights moving out near the old Miller property. That was the farm's name, though no Millers had lived there in decades. The report came from a nearby resident who sounded genuinely shaken. I radioed it in and waited a few minutes, hoping someone else might volunteer to check it out. No one did. I even debated ignoring it, telling myself it was just kids messing around. But part of me felt like if I didn't at least take a look, I'd never stop thinking about it. I told dispatch I'd drive out and do a quick perimeter check. The road leading there was as bad as I remembered. Narrow, lined with trees, barely lit by the cruiser's headlights. Leaves skittered across the gravel like whispers. As I got closer, I noticed how the temperature dropped. It wasn't subtle. The air got colder the second I turned up the drive, like crossing into a different place altogether. I parked the cruiser about 50 feet from the farmhouse. I left the engine running, like I needed a safety net, something I could sprint back to. The structure looked worse than usual. Something about it seemed subtly off, like it had shifted in shape, as if it was leaning toward me. I stepped out of the car and clicked on my flashlight. The beam was sharp, but it didn't seem to reach very far. The darkness around the farmhouse felt thick, not just shadows, but something heavier. I could hear the creaking of the windmill, slow and rhythmic like a ticking clock. I moved slowly around the property, staying close to the fence. My plan was just to scan, maybe call it in, and leave. But then I saw it. Faint lights inside the house, like flickers from a lantern. They moved, not in a pattern, but slowly, drifting from room to room. No one had electricity out there. No one had keys to that place. I stood frozen for a few seconds, watching the lights. They weren't steady, more like someone was walking slowly through the house with an old lantern. I tried convincing myself it was just kids, but deep down I knew better. Nothing about those lights felt normal, and they cast no glow outside the windows. I reached for my radio and called in my location. This is 411. I've got visual movement inside the Miller property, investigating possible trespassing. There was silence on the other end, which was odd. Dispatch usually confirmed right away. I repeated myself, but still got nothing. Then, all at once, the lights inside the house went out. No flicker, no dimming, just gone, like someone had snuffed them with a switch. The silence after that was unbearable. Even the windmill had stopped. I don't know why I did it, but I crossed the fence and moved toward the porch. Each step on the porch groaned under my boots, but it was the silence around me that made it feel like I was trespassing into something old. Not just abandoned, forgotten. I placed my hand on the door, expecting it to be locked, but it swung open before I even pushed, like it had been waiting. The inside was dust-coated and smelled like rot, but not decay, more like wet wood and time. My flashlight danced across broken furniture, long faded wallpaper, and a collapsed staircase. The room ahead looked lived in, despite no one being there for decades. That was when I noticed the footprints. In the dust, fresh ones, moving across the floor ahead of me, barefoot and small, like a child's. They stopped just before the kitchen doorway. I called out instinctively, "Sheriff's Department, anyone here?" I felt stupid the second I said it. I stepped forward and shined the light into the kitchen. Nothing. But I could feel something. Not hear. Feel. Like the air pressure had changed. I was being watched. I spun around quickly, checking behind me, but I was still alone. The air felt heavier than before, like it was pushing against my lungs. Then I heard the noise. Not loud, but close. It came from upstairs. 3 slow, deliberate steps above me, directly overhead. The staircase was broken, so no one could have gone up there. My brain immediately searched for explanations, but none made sense. I backed up toward the doorway, ready to leave, when I heard something else. A whisper, quiet, broken, and impossible to understand. It wasn't coming from upstairs. It was coming from right behind the kitchen doorway, the place where the footprints stopped. I aimed my flashlight directly into the doorway, but it didn't show anything past the threshold. It was like the beam got swallowed up, fading into pure black. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, but my body wouldn't move. I felt like I was being dared to take one more step. Then something reached out. I didn't see it, not clearly, but I felt it brush past my hand, cold and dry like old cloth. I staggered backward, nearly falling, and the moment I did, the air shifted again. The house felt disappointed. I didn't say anything. I didn't radio. I just turned and walked out the front door without looking back. My flashlight flickered once, and for a brief second I thought it would die completely. When I stepped off that porch, I felt my weight return, like gravity had changed inside. Back in the cruiser, I locked the doors and tried calling dispatch again. The radio crackled, then a voice finally came through, but it wasn't anyone from the station. It was my own voice, distorted, repeating my call from earlier, word for word. Then silence. I stared at the farmhouse through the windshield. No lights, no movement. But something shifted in the upstairs window. A curtain swayed, just slightly. I didn't wait to see more. I threw the car in reverse and got out of there faster than I care to admit. Back at the station, I filed a report but left out certain things. No one asked questions. They never do when it's about that place. One of the older deputies just gave me a look like he already knew, like he'd seen it before. That week, I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up at exactly 2:13 a.m. every night with the sound of those slow footsteps in my ears. My house, not the farm. But no one was ever there. Not outside, not inside. Just the sound, then silence. One night, I found dirt on my hallway floor, small prints, barefoot. I cleaned them, locked everything, and stayed up. At 2:13, I heard the whisper again, just like at the house. This time, it was clearer. You opened the door. I've never gone back to that farm. I won't. But sometimes when I'm out late, patrolling the far edge of town, I'll see a faint yellow light moving through those broken windows. And sometimes, just sometimes, it flickers toward me. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I hadn't heard my sister's name out loud in over a year. Not from family, not from friends, and definitely not from strangers. After she went missing, the investigation hit a wall fast. No leads, no calls, nothing but her empty car parked outside a diner in upstate Pennsylvania. I'd buried the case deep in a locked part of my brain just to function. So when a man we brought in for trespassing calmly looked at me and said, "Where's your sister, officer?" I froze. Not just because he said it, but how he said it, like we were in on something together. He had this hollow look, like someone who'd been watching from a distance for a very long time. The guy was in his 50s, wearing torn clothes and no ID, just a duffel bag full of newspaper clippings and old receipts. He kept smiling, not in a crazy way, but like he knew something I didn't. I stayed professional, cuffed him without a word, and brought him in. But inside, something shifted. My hands wouldn't stop sweating. We processed him like usual, though no one could figure out how he got into the restricted state property where we found him. I volunteered to sit in on the interview, partly out of curiosity, mostly out of a bad gut feeling I couldn't shake. The room was cold, more than usual, and the lights flickered once when I walked in. He didn't speak at first, just stared at the camera, like he was waiting for someone else to arrive. When I finally asked his name, he said, "You won't believe me." I asked again. That's when he turned and said, "She was wearing a gray hoodie when I saw her. That's what my sister had on the day she disappeared." The detail hadn't been made public. Only family, close friends, and maybe one or two detectives would have known. My blood ran cold, but I tried to keep my face straight. I asked, "Where did you see her?" His answer, "Someplace you've never been willing to look." I pressed for more, but he shut down. Just looked away and mumbled, "She asked me not to tell." His tone wasn't mocking. It was soft, almost regretful, like he knew what he was saying would unravel something I wasn't ready for. We ended the session, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I pulled up her file again. Photos, reports, all the old maps I hadn't looked at in ages. There was a spot north of town, past the ridge, where her phone had pinged briefly before going dead. I'd forgotten all about it, because it had never made the final report. I couldn't sleep, so I drove out there alone after midnight. No flashlight, just the cruiser's headlights lighting up trees and frost. It was silent. But when I stepped out, I swear I heard the sound of someone breathing, not mine. It stopped the second I moved. I stood there for a while, holding my breath, trying to listen past the ringing in my ears. The air had a damp weight to it, like the world was waiting for me to decide something. I took a few steps past the trees, following where the leaves looked slightly disturbed. My boots made barely a sound, but I felt like I was being tracked. There was a narrow path I'd never noticed before, more of a depression in the ground than a trail. As I followed it, the woods grew unnaturally quiet. Even the breeze had stopped. Every few steps I felt like turning back, but I couldn't. Something about this place pulled at the part of me that still believed she was alive. The path ended near a rusted gate, half buried in moss, barely standing. Beyond it was a clearing I'd never seen marked on any map. It felt like something was wrong with the space, too symmetrical, too clean. I tried to radio in, but got nothing but static. Then a voice cut through it. It wasn't dispatch. It wasn't even a full sentence. Just my name, once, clear as day, through layers of static. I backed away, my throat tightening. I didn't run, but I wanted to. When I turned back toward the path, I saw something hanging from one of the trees. It was a hoodie, gray, faded, too small for an adult. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. It looked like it had been there for a long time, but somehow not weathered. My legs started moving on their own, taking me back to the car faster than I realized. I drove out of those woods without looking in the rear view once. The next morning, I told no one. I reviewed the footage from the interrogation room again, looking for any clue. Around the 11-minute mark, the man's eyes drifted toward the corner of the room, and he smiled, just for a second. The angle showed nothing was there, but he whispered something under his breath. I played it back over and over, slowed it down, enhanced the audio. He said, "She knows you're close now." I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was in my office chair, heart pounding. It didn't feel like a taunt. It felt like a warning, or maybe a confession. When I walked past the holding cell later that day, I glanced in without thinking. He wasn't there. They said he'd been transferred earlier that morning, but no one signed off on it. No paperwork, no vehicle logs. It was like he vanished from the building. For the rest of the shift, I kept replaying everything. The hoodie, the static, the whisper, and that clearing that felt too perfect. I couldn't prove anything, couldn't file a report, but something inside me had shifted. Something told me she wasn't gone. Not really. I took a few days off and didn't tell anyone why. I knew I couldn't explain it without sounding like I'd lost it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the man hadn't come to taunt me. He came to lead me somewhere, to point me in a direction I'd avoided too long. I went back to the ridge before dawn, dressed in plain clothes and carrying only a flashlight and a notebook. I followed the same path, the one that felt more remembered than discovered. The air was thick again, like it held its breath. As I passed the rusted gate, I noticed something new. There were symbols carved into one of the stones by the gate, faint, almost erased by time. I snapped a picture without thinking, not sure why. Everything in that space made me feel like I shouldn't be there, but something inside told me I had to keep going. The clearing hadn't changed. I sat down in the center of the clearing. The earth was unnaturally soft, like it had been disturbed recently. I stayed silent, listening, trying not to move. Then I heard it, bare feet stepping carefully behind me. But when I turned, there was no one, just trees, still and watching. Something made me speak. I said her name, not loud, not a shout, just enough for the air to carry it, and that's when the breeze returned. Light at first, then steady. I stood slowly, scanning the edge of the woods. I saw a shape to my right, small, hunched and moving away. I didn't chase it. I followed carefully, through brush and roots, until the ground gave way to stone. An old well, boarded over and hidden behind a collapsed shed, stood in front of me. The boards had been recently pried off, not all the way, just enough for something to climb in or out. I knelt down and looked inside. Nothing but cold, still air, and a darkness that didn't reflect back. Then something caught my eye. At the edge of the stones, wedged between two rocks, was a bracelet. Heron, the one she wore every day. The one I'd never seen again after she vanished. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking. I didn't take it. I left it there. I backed away, slow, careful, like the woods were listening. And just as I turned to leave, I heard a voice, soft and tired. "Thank you." That's all it said. I never told anyone. I couldn't. But I stopped feeling the weight I'd carried for years. I know she's not gone. not in the way people mean. Some part of her is still there, in those woods, watching, not waiting to be found, but making sure I remembered. When my daughter first told me there was a man outside her window, I brushed it off as a dream. She was 6, imaginative, sensitive, often waking from nightmares she couldn't explain. But this time was different. She wasn't scared, she was curious. She told me he wore a dark uniform like mine, that he smiled at her through the glass and waved slowly every night around the same time. When I asked what else she saw, she just said, "He looks like you, but his face isn't right." That part stuck with me. I'm a state trooper, have been for 10 years. The job wears on you, but I keep home and work separate. My daughter had never seen me in uniform at night, never once. So I asked when she started seeing him. Her answer made my chest tighten. Right after Mommy left. My wife and I separated last year. She moved to another town, and I got full custody. We kept the routine steady, same school, same house, same bedtime. But lately, my daughter had been quieter, more withdrawn. I thought it was the divorce catching up. That night, I checked her window myself before bed. Locked, screen intact, no footprints outside, no signs anyone had been near. I even reviewed the security cam on the side of the house. Nothing but swaying trees and bugs flickering past the lens. Still, I moved her bed away from the window just to be safe. She didn't protest. In fact, she thanked me. But before falling asleep, she whispered something I didn't understand. "He doesn't wave when you're home." I thought it meant she felt safer when I was there. I hoped that's all it meant. The next night I stayed up late, parked across the street with a clear view of the house, just to prove to myself that it was nothing. I had a clear angle on her window. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m. Nothing. I was about to start the car when something caught my eye. Just a shape, barely there, moving near the side fence. I leaned forward, watching. The shape didn't move right. It was too smooth, too quiet. Then it stopped, directly beneath her window. I grabbed my flashlight and ran across the street. By the time I got there, the yard was empty. No sound, no footprints, not even crushed grass. I checked the camera again. Static had replaced the footage from 12:58 to 1:03, perfectly timed with what I'd seen. I didn't tell my daughter what I saw. I didn't want to scare her, and honestly, I wasn't sure what to say. Whatever had been outside that night, if anything, left no trace. But the static on the camera wasn't a glitch. That had never happened before. The next morning, she acted normal, ate her cereal, packed her bag, asked about her field trip. No sign of fear or even confusion, until I was about to drop her off and she said, "He waved again last night, but this time he had something in his hand." I asked what it was. She paused like she was thinking hard. "It looked like a badge, like yours, but scratched." That stopped me cold. I hadn't shown her my badge in months, and I'd never let her hold it. There was no way she could describe that level of detail unless she saw it. That afternoon, I called a buddy from the department and asked him to do a sweep of the house. He checked everything, fences, cameras, even the attic, just in case. Nothing. He asked if I wanted to file a report, but I said no. I didn't want the wrong people asking questions. That night, I moved a chair into my daughter's room and sat there after she fell asleep. Just me, the hum of the baby monitor, and the occasional creak of the house settling. I stared at the window for hours, nothing, until just before 2 a.m. The air in the room changed. No sound, no wind, just a sudden weight. The kind of pressure you feel when someone walks into a room behind you. I turned slowly toward the window and saw nothing. But my daughter mumbled in her sleep, "He's here." I stood up, heart pounding, flashlight ready. I walked to the window and shined the light out. Just trees, fence, stillness. I turned back to check on her, and for a split second, I saw it in the glass, a reflection, standing behind me. I spun around, empty room. No sound, no movement. But the reflection had been clear. Man in uniform, same build as me, same posture. Just wrong face, like it was missing the detail, like a photo that hadn't fully loaded. Just shape and smirk. I checked every corner of the house that night. Every door locked, no alarms tripped. When I looked in the mirror before bed, I noticed a fingerprint on my badge, smudged, like someone had touched it with damp skin. I hadn't worn it in 2 days. I took my daughter to her mom's the next day, made up some excuse about overnight duty. I needed the house to myself, not for rest, not for work, just answers. I was starting to feel like the walls themselves were hiding something. I sat in her room again that night, but this time I didn't wait quietly. I taped black paper over the windows, left one small slit for the camera lens I placed outside. Inside, I kept the room dark and stayed still in the corner, pretending to be asleep in the chair. At 2:06 a.m., the camera feed on my phone glitched, briefly, then recovered. On screen, I saw him, just standing there at the window, face pressed close to the glass. The uniform was mine, down to the badge number. But his eyes weren't looking inside. They were looking straight into the lens. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just watched. He stood there for a full minute, unmoving. Then he raised his hand and waved, slow, stiff, like someone imitating a wave they'd seen before. After that, he stepped out of frame. The camera went static again. I ran outside within seconds, flashlight scanning every angle. Nothing. No footprints, no sound of movement, just stillness. When I came back in, I noticed something on the windowsill. 3 short scratches in the wood. Clean, even, as if carved by a blade or fingernails. The next day, I reviewed every frame of the footage again. When he waved, something flickered behind him. Not a reflection, something moving in sync with him, like a shadow that didn't belong to either of us. I paused the footage and zoomed in. My heart nearly stopped. Behind him, faint but visible, was a second face in the dark. Smaller, watching him, watching me. It looked like a child's. I slammed the laptop shut. I didn't want to know more. I realized then this wasn't about me. It was about her. I had let this thing get close, too close. It didn't want to harm her, it wanted to become familiar. It had been practicing, learning my habits, my face, even my wave. And now it was testing how far it could go before someone noticed. I moved out 2 days later. New city, new job, new school. My daughter never mentioned the man again, but some nights just before bed she asks without looking up, "You're real, right?" I always say yes. I think she believes me. Most of the time, so do I.